Some big news as it pertains to the Maple Leaf. The 20-man roster has been released for the under-23 Olympic qualifiers for Canada. We'll show you that board right now. A lot of names to kind of take in and digest. 2 Canadian Premier League players are on it. Thomas Milliot-Giguère of Pacific FC. And then you also have David Norman Jr. returning to the league as well. So those are your 2 CPL players. As we know, Canada will be in a group with El Salvador, Haiti, Honduras. And OneSoccer is your home for those Olympic qualifiers, which will begin on March 18th. So as we look ahead to this tournament, gentlemen, that will begin in Guadalajara. And we just saw the 20-man roster. Gareth, I'll start with you. What stands out?
Good for all these players to make themselves available, and I'm looking forward to seeing each and every one of them represent the red and white and the Maple Leaf come this tournament. It's a real test of the alignment that John Herdman's established within the men's program, transitioning from the youth national teams to the senior national teams, because there are players with senior national team experience in this team. Derek Cornelius, Godinho, Broguillard, just to mention a couple of them. I think that this just kind of shows that the player pool within the Canadian men's national team is as deep as it's ever been. No longer are there, it's not like uncapped FC representing this nation time and time again. There's legitimate, very good professionals that are going to be on full display. I think Canada has the prospects of being very good down the flanks. They have a lot of talented wide players from fullback to wing players as well. Some interesting talents up front. If there might be a weakness in the team, it might be in the central midfield, where the team was kind of decimated through the losses of no Harry Payton, no Liam Fraser, and players of that ilk. But I think there's a lot of talent in this side, and I think it's absolutely realistic to expect this team to finish in the top 2 of their group and go on to a knockout round matchup where if you win, you're in when it comes to Olympic qualifying.
Yeah, I think it's an important point to make that with the combination of World Cup qualifiers being played at the same time and all the difficulties that the pandemic's presented, a few years ago, I don't know what this roster would have looked like with those kinds of conditions, right? So it does say something about the depth of the program that John Herdman is starting to build, and those 2 January camps over the past couple of years have been an important part of that. That there's still a roster that I think is going to be underdogs when it goes up against the US, Mexico, those kinds of teams, no doubt about that. But it's still a competitive roster that I think has a chance of advancing in this tournament. In terms of the roster itself, I think it's strong at the back. Cornelius is going to be vital. Pantemis, Broguillard, Godinho, Gareth mentioned, these are all players with senior experience. I think Michael Baldissimo can step into midfield and be that holding midfield player. He impressed me for the Vancouver Whitecaps last season. The question for me is who's going to score the goals, because there simply isn't a player on this roster who has scored goals on a regular basis at the senior level. So who's going to step up there? Can it be Tajon Buchanan? Can someone like Charles Andreas Brim playing in Europe fare well at this kind of level? That's what we're going to have to wait and see, I think. But the core of the team at the back, I think, is pretty strong.
Well, as you mentioned, just everything facing Team Canada. We always knew Davies and David wouldn't be a part of this just simply because of the World Cup qualifiers as well. But we know with COVID restrictions, and also, by the way, people looking at that list may say, okay, I see Vancouver Whitecaps being represented, CF Montreal, no Toronto FC, but we also know they've been dealing with some COVID cases. So you wonder if that can change. But either way, Ollie, if I come back to you, is there anyone that maybe you're surprised was left off?
Well, obviously the lack of Toronto FC players stands out. It sounds as if they wouldn't have been able to get those players down to Mexico until after the first game of the tournament. They might have then had to miss the second game as well, just getting through quarantines and things like that. So it just didn't really make sense at that point. Obviously those 3 games, are going to be defining in the tournament as a whole. It doesn't really make sense to select them at that point, I don't think. Other names that are missing that stand out, Theo Corbianu, Frank Stirring. Interestingly there was some reports in the Netherlands that he was going to travel and be part of the squad. So I start to wonder, and I don't know anything here, but I start to wonder if maybe the senior team has come into play when you look at Scott Kennedy getting injured. Stephen Vittoria's had some injury issues lately. Could there be a problem at centre-back that means that Stirring's been promoted? I don't know, but those were 2 big names that I was expecting to be there from Europe and aren't on this roster.
Yeah, my understanding is that the squad that was listed was changing right up to the last minute because of the Toronto FC COVID cases that have ruled the players out, as well as European players being available. And like Ollie said, the World Cup qualifiers being played at the end of the month. This is the first time the Olympic and World Cup qualifiers are being played at the same time. And rather than griping or nitpicking and looking at players that perhaps were left out, I'm looking at players that were perhaps left out because they'll be needed at the end of the month for those games against Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. Because I'm counting at least 9 players that could have played for this Canadian Olympic qualifying team that might be very much part of John Herdman's plans come the end of the month. And remember, it is a FIFA window. So I'm looking at an Alistair Johnston, a Kamal Miller, a Christian Gutierrez at the back, all players that could have played for this team. Dane Sinclair might very well be the third goalkeeper involved. Liam Miller, Alphonso Davies, Theo Corbianu, Jonathan David, the list goes on and on of good young players that have come through this country that, the priority right now has to be qualifying for the World Cup. And it's about getting the best players available into these teams, players that are available. And Andy, it's a very important point, players that are playing or at least training at the highest level right now. The CPL and MLS players haven't played a competitive match for 4-5 months now, and a lot of them haven't even got the green light to start training with their teams as well. So that's something to consider before you kind of assess this team and say, well, what about this player? There's obviously good reason.